Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into another conference realignment update. We've got major stuff on the Pac-12. I wanted to try and record a video last night. Basically, I was physically unable after I consumed something and I couldn't upload last night. I couldn't physically film. But guys, I'm back this morning after a hard workout. We've got big stuff. What is happening with the Pac-12? What's going on with the Big 12? Pac-12 realignment rumors. You can take a look at this article. It really just details the situation with Oregon and Washington, who it says Oregon and Washington are difficult to predict. For both, it likely makes sense to keep their options open and hold out for the possibility of joining the Big 10 or the SEC. The Big 12 would take those first four, meaning they would take Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State. But an effort to bring in all six is certainly worth attempting. And it talks about their commissioner. Apparently, this new Big 12 commissioner is extremely aggressive. I discussed this yesterday. He's extremely aggressive in expansion. He views it as an either or. Either the Big 12 expands and becomes the third super conference, or they sit by the wayside and let the ACC and the Pac-12 possibly form an alliance, which would make them the third biggest entity in college football. Very interesting. And here's the major stuff on the Pac-12 and its possible demise. Could the Pac-12 end up regretting its 2021 inaction? Less than a year ago, the Pac-12 could have made a move. The new commissioner received plenty of interest from leaders at Big 12 schools who were looking to leave the conference. It would have been way too easy to poach its most attractive members, plant a flag in the state of Texas, and potentially bring an end to the Big 12 conference. And it's interesting because last year, when the realignment happened with the two major schools, Texas and Oklahoma, going to the SEC, people pondered the thought, would the Big 12 cease to exist? Now, obviously, they bring in the four teams from the American. They're able to recover. Now that same question looms with the Pac-12, and it's even a greater threat for the Pac-12 now because I truly believe if the Big 12 poaches those four rumored teams that we've been hearing, the conference is done because there would be zero incentive for Washington and Oregon to stay, and then once Washington and Oregon leave, your conference completely dissolves. It doesn't exist anymore. That's the main issue for the Pac-12. Those four teams leave, that would then call for Oregon and Washington to leave, either to the Big 10 if a spot opens up, or they would also go to the they would also go to the Big 12, which would create an 18-team super conference in the Big 12, and the Pac-12 at that point would be left with four teams, I believe, Washington State, Oregon State, Cal, and another team I'm forgetting, but just four teams, and at that point, if you're the Pac-12, would you try and fight for survival and add Mountain West teams, or could the Mountain West poach like Washington State and Oregon State and completely dissolve the Pac-12? That's what this argument is saying. The Pac-12, the most intriguing part of potential realignment might come at the conference level. A year ago, it seemed possible the Big 12 could fall apart with the Mountain West and AAC there to potentially pick up some of the pieces. It didn't happen. The original possibility could be in play again. If the Pac-12 loses 4 or 6 more teams to other conferences, it may be the end of the conference. It's hard to know. So Stanford was the other team I was forgetting. And Stanford, they might just become an independent, honestly. It's hard to know what Stanford or Cal would do, but Washington State and Oregon State, absolutely. Could you imagine the Pac-12 conference getting destroyed? Washington State and Oregon State getting grabbed by the Mountain West. I understand Washington State, this would be a major step down for those schools. But Washington State and Oregon State, they seem to fit the Mountain West so well. I mean, do they not? It would be competitive for them. They would have a chance. One Mountain West source said the league would pitch stability to those schools if a situation arose. Both are in the Mountain West footprint. Washington State is a 5-hour drive from Boise. The Mountain West already had a case to make as the top Group of 5 league when the realignment dust settles. Adding 2 Pac-12 schools would only improve on that. So we have the idea of the Pac-12 completely dissolving with teams possibly headed to the Big Ten. That'd be Washington and Oregon to either the Big Ten or the SEC if they get lucky. If they get lucky enough, you've got the 4 teams going to the Big 12, which would start this whole process. And then you possibly have both Washington State and Oregon State going to the Mountain West, and that would leave California and Stanford as free agents. Of course, there's also the thought, if the Big Ten really wants Notre Dame, they could take Stanford because of their academics, and it could be a nice little rivalry with Notre Dame in conference. We know Notre Dame faces Stanford routinely, in their independent schedule. So this is a horrible situation for the Pac-12. I talked about it yesterday. They're getting desperate. They're trying to form an alliance right now with the ACC, and we've actually got some interesting stuff on that. First, I want to talk about Dennis Dodd on the Pac-12 survival chances. It's 50-50 right now on the chances the Pac-12 survives. This whole situation hinges on if the Big 12 is able to poach the 4 teams. I think they're the most at risk. I wouldn't say it's going to die, but I certainly think it is a possibility. And then we've got this tweet. The Pac-12 and the ACC are discussing a broadcast partnership that would have the ACC network or a new ESPN network air Pac-12 games on the West Coast. Sources tell SI Now, but a question looms. Will it generate enough additional TV cash to be worthwhile? Yeah, this seems like a complete cluster. There's very little chance of this happening, guys. You can tell by the way this tweet is worded. It seems like a Hail Mary attempt. And the whole alliance thing, it seems like, we had the whole alliance between the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and the ACC. Look how that turned out. It seems like the idea of another alliance is a little bit ridiculous. And then when it comes to the alliance, take a look at this tweet. Clash of Champions Bowl. LOL. I mean, what kind of class? Really? The Clash of Champions Bowl. ACC champ and the Pac-12 champ will play an extra game after conference championship at a to-be-determined location. I heard it was going to be Las Vegas. But again, this whole thing seems just ridiculous. The Pac-12 is trying anything at this point to keep the Big 12 from poaching teams, to keep Oregon and Washington from leaving their conference. It's commendable. I understand. They're fighting for survival right now. But it just seems so ridiculous that something like this would ever happen. So this tweet is saying the ACC would have their conference championship, the Pac-12 would have their conference championship, and then the winner of those games would meet in like Las Vegas, in Vegas, to have a Clash of Champions Bowl. How does that align with the playoff? Wouldn't the timeline be messed up? Wouldn't you be preparing for your playoff game, but you've got a Clash of Champions Bowl? This whole thing is a mess, guys. What a complete mess. We've got another rumor, though. Late night rumor. So this happened last night. Late night rumor here thanks to a source on the West Coast. CBS has informally told the Pac-12 they will not be a player for their rights once the 30-day exclusive window with Fox ESPN is over. So guys, it's widely expected that ESPN will get the rights to whatever the Pac-12 ends up being. It was already reported Fox wants nothing to do with the Pac-12 at this point due to the uncertainty, due to Fox being obsessed with the Big Ten. They're going to go all in on the Big Ten. They're going to give Big Ten all of their money. And guys, CBS, it makes sense. CBS, remember, they're transitioning. They're not going to have the rights to the SEC game at 3:30. They're going to have to either transition to the Big Ten or maybe the next Big 12 Super Conference. CBS not interested at all in the Pac-12 currently. I think that's very smart. There's no reason. Focus on the conferences that are actually gonna survive. I'm not saying the Pac-12 is gonna die for certain, but the way things are trending, the most likely scenario, in my opinion, is the Pac-12 dies. The problem is because those 4 teams leave the Pac-12, Oregon and Washington are gonna leave guaranteed. You're done. You have 4 teams left in your conference. And 2 of them are Washington State and Oregon State. Another's Cal, and then you have Stanford. Those are not 4 attractive teams. At that point, that's when the Mountain West could try and poach. At that point, those 2 teams that I was talking about. If the Pac-12 ACC Alliance gets beyond the discussion phase and actually happens, then the ACC is in trouble. It's been mentioned before, but anything that reopens their contract voids the current GOR. A new one would need to be signed. So that would enable Clemson and teams like Florida State possibly to opt out and leave the ACC without facing any fee for leaving early, because right now they have a major TV deal through 2036. If the ACC does some sort of alliance with the Pac-12, that would enable Clemson and possibly FSU and Miami to leave the ACC with 0 fee and head off to the SEC if the SEC wants to expand. And then in the next tweet, in that case, bid farewell to at least FSU and Clemson. That's what I was saying. FSU and Clemson would very likely leave to make more money in the SEC in that case. There's not a single ACC school I've heard from either directly or someone working there or secondhand anecdotally that wants this merger being floated. They all want more money, but understand the ramifications of their current contract getting reopened at this critical time. So I'm guessing he didn't talk to anyone within Clemson, because I'm sure Clemson would love this to be reopened so they could leave and make more money in the SEC. He's probably talking to people from Boston College. Yeah, I'm sure Boston College doesn't want it reopened because their conference would get destroyed because the major teams would leave their conference. So, I mean, maybe Boston College, NC State doesn't want it open. Wake Forest would be another team that doesn't want this thing renegotiated because it would enable the big players to leave, which would severely hurt their would severely hurt their conference and possibly make them a sub-conference at that point. Once again, guys, we're looking at the big 2 super conferences in the Big Ten, in the SEC, and then a possible third super conference forming right now in the Big 12. Important team to watch. We've talked about it a few times. In the ACC is North Carolina. North Carolina is very attractive for both the Big Ten and the SEC. It'll be also, you've got Duke tied on with them. It'll be very interesting to see what they do. But guys, the bottom line right now, the Pac-12 on the brink of disaster. They could get completely ripped to shreds with some of their teams heading for the Big Ten, some of their teams heading for the Big 12, some of their teams getting poached by the Mountain West Conference. It's a sad, sad, sad story. And then maybe a team like Stanford either goes independent or joins the Big Ten. I don't know what California's options would be at that point. This is all due to greed. It's so sad. It's all due to greed. You got to feel for these teams. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.